In the dense jungles northwest of Saigon, the air is heavy, thick with humidity, and the scent of red earth mixed with gunpowder. It is 1966. American aircraft circle endlessly above, dropping fire and iron on a land that refuses to break. But beneath that chaos, another world exists. A silent world, a hidden city carved into the heart of the earth. And in its darkness, women are at war. When the first American troops arrived in Kuchai, they saw nothing but jungle, quiet, green, and deceptively calm. But below their boots stretched more than 250 kilometers of tunnels, a living network connecting villages, command centers, and hospitals. It was the nervous system of the Viet Cong resistance, and it was kept alive not only by soldiers, but by women. They were young, some barely 17, farmers' daughters, students, mothers, women who traded dresses for shovels and safety for shadows. They were not trained for war, but war didn't ask for permission. It simply arrived and forced them to adapt. At first, the tunnels were crude, just narrow burrows used to hide from French patrols during the First Indochina War. But as the American War intensified, the tunnels grew deeper, more complex, evolving into a hidden civilization. Every meter of earth was carved by hand, by fingers, by the will of people who refused to surrender. One former Ku-Chi woman remembered, "We didn't have machines, just hose, pans, and our bare hands. Every night we dug a little deeper. The earth became our skin. The soil was dense, clay-like, tough to cut, but perfect for defense. It absorbed shock waves from bombs, muffled footsteps, and sealed sound like a secret. The tunnels were built in 3 levels. The first, about 3 meters below, used for living and fighting. The second, for storage and hiding. The third, deep and suffocating, an escape route for when death rained from above. Inside, it was dark. The air smelled of damp soil and sweat. There was no space to stand upright, barely enough to breathe. And yet, people, women, lived there for years. By day, they dug silently, listening for the sound of planes overhead. By night, they carried dirt in baskets to the river, scattering it in the water to hide their tracks. Each movement was calculated, each breath measured. One slip, one cough, and the tunnels could be found, bombed, buried forever. They became one with the earth, their skin darkened, their senses sharpened. They learned to navigate the pitch-black passages by touch alone. One hand on the wall, one hand on a rifle. "We didn't fear the dark," one woman said. "The dark was our ally." As American forces escalated the war, Ku-Chi became one of the most bombed places on Earth. Entire forests were flattened by napalm and Agent Orange. Villages turned to ash. But beneath that devastation, the women kept building. They built kitchens that vented smoke through bamboo pipes stretching 20 meters away. They created underground wells, sleeping chambers, even meeting rooms. All carved in silence, all hidden under layers of dirt. Above them, American soldiers marched. Below them, women whispered orders. Sometimes the walls trembled with explosions. Sometimes the tunnels flooded and they'd spend hours waist-deep in mud, clutching candles to keep them alive. But they stayed. They always stayed. "When bombs fell, we didn't run," another woman recalled. "We dug deeper." The tunnels were more than a refuge. They were a revolution. Inside, women became more than civilians. They became engineers, medics, messengers, fighters. They carried grenades hidden in rice baskets, maps folded into hair buns, and courage in their hearts. They were small, nimble, and underestimated, exactly what the resistance needed. Their presence was vital. They navigated the tunnels with speed and silence, slipping through passages too narrow for men. They stitched uniforms, cooked rations, and treated the wounded, often within meters of enemy soldiers walking above. The earth separated us from death, one survivor said, sometimes by only this much. She holds her fingers an inch apart. The narrator's tone deepens. They had no medals, no ranks, no fame. But without them, the tunnels would have fallen, and perhaps the war itself would have ended differently. In the heart of Kuchai, these women became the lifeblood of a hidden world, a world that defied the most powerful army on earth. And every meter they dug brought them closer to victory and to the edge of exhaustion. As the sun sets over the jungle, the camera slowly pans down through the soil into the darkness. We see flickering candlelight, sweat dripping, hands covered in mud, still digging. A whisper echoes. We were not afraid of dying. We were afraid of being forgotten. Fade to black. Beneath the surface of Vietnam's jungle, time moved differently. Days and nights blended together, lit only by the dim glow of candles and the quiet rhythm of breathing. Here, underground, the women of Cu Chi built a world of their own, a hidden civilization without sunlight, without color, but full of life. For many of these women, the tunnels were home for years. They were born in villages that no longer existed, bombed to dust by B-52 raids. Their new address was a patch of earth 6 meters deep. Their ceiling, the jungle floor, their walls, red clay, their sky, silence, and in that silence, they lived, they laughed, and they endured. Each day began the same way, the dim flicker of oil lamps, the faint sound of dripping water from the tunnel ceiling. The air was thick, hard to breathe. Sometimes the candles burned too low, and the tunnels became pitch black, a darkness so deep that you could not see your own hand. But the women moved through it easily. They knew every turn, every bend, every narrow passage by heart. They learned to navigate through smell and touch. The earth had a rhythm, a heartbeat that told them where they were. We could feel the footsteps of Americans above, one survivor recalled. When the ground trembled, we stopped breathing. Despite the danger, life continued. Meals were cooked in underground kitchens called Hoang Cam stoves. The smoke from the fires was channeled through long bamboo pipes, venting far away through hidden outlets disguised as termite mounds. Rice, cassava, dried fish, simple food, often mixed with clay dust. Yet, to those in the tunnels, it tasted like survival. Sometimes they shared one small bowl among 5 people. Sometimes they went 2 days without food at all, but no one complained. They had learned that hunger was easier than fear. At night, when the jungle above went quiet, the tunnels came alive with whispers. Young women told stories of home, of parents they hadn't seen in years, of children they might never meet again. Some sang folk songs softly, their voices echoing through the tunnels like a lullaby to the earth. Music was forbidden. Sound could give away their position. But they sang anyway under their breath, for courage, for memory, for each other. Hygiene was a daily battle. There were no toilets, no showers, only buckets and damp cloths. The smell of mold and sweat clung to everything. Lice, rats, and snakes were constant companions. In the rainy season, the tunnels flooded, turning passageways into muddy rivers. They waded through waist-deep water for hours, trying to protect rifles, documents, and medicine from ruin. Disease spread quickly, malaria, skin infections, dysentery. There were no hospitals underground, only small chambers where medics, mostly women, treated the sick with herbs and determination. We didn't have morphine, one nurse said. We used songs to distract the wounded while we pulled out bullets. But even in that darkness, there was light, the light of human connection. Women shared everything, their food, their clothes, their stories, their fear. They became sisters, bound not by blood, but by the soil itself. They celebrated birthdays in silence, one candle, no cake. They sewed tiny flowers on their uniforms, a secret reminder that beauty still existed, even 6 meters underground. Sometimes love bloomed too, quietly, cautiously. Letters were passed hand to hand through the tunnels, tiny notes written on cigarette paper. But love in war was fleeting. Many never saw their lovers again. Still, those moments, a smile, a touch, kept their hearts alive. We lived in the dark, one woman said, but we still dreamed of the light. Above them, the world burned. American troops called the area the Iron Triangle. To them, it was a nightmare, a place where the enemy seemed to vanish into thin air. Soldiers spoke in fear of the women in black, the silent shadows who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. They couldn't understand how women could endure such hell, but underground endurance was all they had. Every time a bomb shook the tunnels, dust filled their lungs, candles went out, and panic clawed at their throats. But they never screamed. They bit their lips, dug deeper, and waited for the noise to stop. The earth protected us, one woman said. It also tried to bury us. In those suffocating chambers, they built a kind of underground society, rules, routines, and rituals that kept them sane. The youngest women were assigned to carry messages. They crawled for hours through dark tunnels, delivering handwritten orders wrapped in plastic. A single mistake, a wrong turn, a dropped note could cost hundreds of lives. The older ones tended to the wounded, their hands trembling but steady. They made bandages out of old shirts and disinfectant from rice wine, and when the fighting stopped, they buried the dead, quietly wrapping each body in cloth before sealing it in the soil. No tears, no words, only silence. One of the women, Nguyen Thi Lan, was just 16 when she joined the Cu Chi resistance. She remembered the day her tunnel collapsed. American bombs had struck nearby, and the earth above caved in, trapping her and 2 comrades in total darkness. For hours they tried to dig upward, but the soil kept falling back. The air grew thin. Her heartbeat slowed. Then she heard it, faint tapping from the other side, a rescue team. They broke through just as her vision went black. When she awoke, she was lying in another chamber, a candle burning beside her. Her comrades had saved her, and by morning she was digging again. "The tunnels never let us go," she said. "Once you were part of them, you became the earth itself." Life underground was brutal, but for many of these women, it was also a source of pride. They were fighting not just for a nation, but for dignity, for the right to exist, to choose, to endure. Each swing of a shovel, each breath in the dark, was an act of defiance against an empire. The narrator's tone turned somber. Years later, when the war finally ended, many of these women returned to the surface, only to find their villages gone, their families scattered. Some couldn't sleep in beds anymore. The silence of the earth still called to them. They missed the tunnels, the only home they'd known for a decade. "When I close my eyes," said one veteran, "I can still feel the damp walls of Cu Chi. It's as if the earth remembers us. In the darkness beneath the jungle, they created a sanctuary of resilience. They laughed in the face of despair. They built a world in the soil, a world that still exists today, as a reminder of what courage truly means. By 1967, the war above the ground had reached its peak. Helicopters swarmed the skies, the jungle burned under endless rain of napalm and gunfire. But the real war, the one that terrified even the most hardened soldiers, was happening below. Beneath the green canopy, hidden under roots and red clay, the women of Ku Chi prepared for the unthinkable. The Americans were coming into the tunnels. When U.S. Command realized that their enemy was living underground, they created a new kind of soldier, small, agile, fearless men known as tunnel rats. Their mission was simple and suicidal. Crawl into the black holes, hunt the Viet Cong, and destroy everything inside. But they were not prepared for what waited below. The first time a tunnel rat entered Ku Chi, he crawled through a narrow passage barely wider than his shoulders. The air was thick, the smell of earth and sweat choking his lungs. He could hear dripping water, and then silence. No movement, no sound. Only the echo of his own heartbeat. Then, click. A bamboo trap sprang shut. The tunnel screamed. He never came out. The tunnels were filled with traps, designed not just to kill, but to terrify. Rotating bamboo spikes coated with poison. Trap doors leading to hidden pits. Tripwires connected to grenades. False floors that collapsed into spears. And behind those traps, the women were waiting. They knew every curve of the tunnels, every breath of air. They could move like shadows, silent, invisible. Their advantage wasn't firepower, it was the dark. One American soldier described it later. You didn't fight people down there, you fought ghosts. The women of Ku Chi had become those ghosts. They waited in silence, motionless, their rifles wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound. When the tunnel rats came, they struck, fast, precise, and merciless. The fighting lasted only seconds, a flash, a scream, and then nothing. The tunnel swallowed the sound. For the women, fear was constant, but they learned to master it. They couldn't afford panic. In those narrow chambers, one wrong move could trigger a collapse. They trained to slow their breathing, to control their heartbeat, to blend into the silence. We had to become the earth, one survivor said, still, cold, patient. Many of the women fought with improvised weapons, knives made from scrap metal, hand grenades made from old American shells. A few carried pistols, ancient Tokarevs or French revolvers passed down from earlier wars. They used what they had and made it deadly. One woman, Nguyen Thi Binh, recalled an encounter. She was crawling through a passage when she heard footsteps. She froze. A flashlight beam cut through the dark. An American voice whispered something she didn't understand. She waited until he was 3 meters away. Then she threw a grenade. The explosion deafened her. When the smoke cleared, she realized she was bleeding from her ear, but alive. I didn't think, I just survived. Above ground, American engineers tried to destroy the tunnels with bulldozers, bombs, and poison gas. They pumped tear gas and water into the entrances, but the tunnels were designed like labyrinths. The gas got lost, the water drained away through hidden vents. Every time they destroyed one section, the women rebuilt it the same night. You destroy, we rebuild, one Viet Cong slogan said. The earth belongs to us, and they meant it. Life underground became even more dangerous. The women now lived with constant bombing, chemical exposure, and the smell of death. Agent Orange seeped into the soil, burning their skin, poisoning their water. Some lost their hair, some their voices, but still, they stayed. If we left the tunnels, one woman said, the war would be over. And we would lose. There were moments when even the bravest broke down. The endless darkness, the hunger, the fear, it all became too much. Some whispered prayers to their ancestors. Others wrote letters they would never send. But then they remembered their fallen friends and picked up the shovel again. For them, courage wasn't a choice. It was survival. The Americans adapted too. They sent flamethrowers into the tunnels, burning everything in their path. The flames devoured the air. Oxygen vanished. Smoke filled the chambers. Women hid their faces in wet cloth, pressing close to the earth, praying the fire would pass. When it did, they coughed, cried silently, and began digging new tunnels the very next day. By 1968, during the Tet Offensive, the Cu Chi tunnels had become a living symbol of defiance. Entire units of the Viet Cong could move beneath the Americans, attack suddenly, then vanish underground. American soldiers were haunted by nightmares of invisible enemies, enemies who seemed to rise from the earth itself. And many of those phantoms were women. One American tunnel rat later confessed in a documentary, "The scariest thing down there wasn't the dark, it was hearing a woman's voice whisper behind you." Those women, small, fearless, and unyielding, turned the tunnels into the graveyard of modern warfare. They proved that courage isn't measured by strength, but by endurance. That survival isn't just a skill, it's a belief. By the end of the war, thousands of women had served in the Cu Chi tunnels. Many died. Many more never returned to normal life. Their faces never appeared on posters or medals, but their fingerprints remain in the walls of those tunnels, literally pressed into the clay. Every scratch of a shovel, every palm print is still there, a silent signature of resistance. In the darkness, they became warriors without recognition, fighters without fear. And though history often forgets them, the tunnels remember. Even today, when tourists walk through Cu Chi, they walk in the footsteps of those women, those who fought not for glory, but for the right to live. "The earth was our mother," one woman said. "She gave us shelter, and we protected her with our lives." By 1972, Vietnam was a nation on fire. The jungle that once hid the resistance was now scorched and hollow. The rivers ran black with oil, and the sky, once filled with the hum of life, was now a storm of smoke and steel. The war was ending, but for the women of Cu Chi, the final chapter would be the hardest of all. The tunnels had endured years of bombing, flooding, poison, and fire. But now they were collapsing, not just from the weight of the earth, but from exhaustion. The women were thin, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights and hunger. Every breath tasted of dust and iron. Still, they dug. Even as their hands bled, even as their comrades disappeared one by one, they refused to stop. "We told ourselves," one woman said, "if the tunnels live, we live." In the final years, the bombing intensified. The Americans called it Operation Rolling Thunder, but in Cu Chi they called it the storm that never ended. Each explosion shook the tunnels like an earthquake. Roofs caved in, entrances vanished under craters, air vents filled with smoke. Sometimes whole sections collapsed with dozens trapped inside. There was no time for rescue, no time for mourning. "We could hear them calling from below," one survivor whispered. Then, silence. In that suffocating darkness, they began to lose their sense of time. Days turned into nights, nights into eternity. Food ran out, water grew scarce, diseases spread unchecked. But they clung to one another. Even when they were too weak to stand, they sang quietly, ancient lullabies, songs their mothers once sang under starlight. Now they sang them in darkness for the friends they had lost. "We sang so the dead wouldn't be alone," one woman said. Despite everything, hope refused to die. Rumors began to reach them that the Americans were retreating, that Saigon was faltering, that freedom was near. They didn't celebrate. They couldn't. They'd learned that hope was fragile and could break as easily as a bamboo trap. Still, they held on to it because it was all they had left. In early 1973, the earth itself betrayed them. An underground chamber near Ben Din collapsed after a B-52 strike hit too close. The shockwave shattered the walls. Mud poured in like water. Among those trapped was Nguyen Thi Lan, the young digger who had once survived another collapse years earlier. This time there was no rescue. The tunnels had become her tomb. Her name is still carved into a small plaque near the Cu Chi Memorial today. Just 3 words: Lan the Digger. By the time the war ended in 1975, the tunnels were mostly silent. Of the thousands who had lived below, only a fraction emerged. They came out thin as shadows, their eyes unadjusted to the light. Some could barely walk. Others wept when they saw the sun for the first time in years. They had survived, but at what cost? The jungles they once defended were gone. The villages were ashes. The rivers were poisoned. The war was over, but peace felt like a stranger. Many of the women returned home to nothing. No families, no recognition, only memories of darkness and the faces of those they'd buried underground. "We were invisible during the war," said one veteran. "And when peace came, we disappeared again." Years later, some of the surviving women revisited Cu Chi. The tunnels had been restored, turned into a museum, a tourist attraction. They watched as visitors crawled through the passages, laughing, taking pictures, not realizing what those tunnels truly meant. One woman knelt down, pressed her palm against the wall, and whispered, "We built this with our lives." The clay was cool beneath her fingers, but she swore she could still feel warmth, the warmth of memory. Many of them carried scars that never healed. Their lungs were damaged from the gas. Their skin burned from chemicals. Their minds haunted by echoes of the dark. But none of them regretted their choice. They had fought not for medals, not for power, but for each other, for the soil, for the simple dream of freedom. "We were not soldiers," one said. "We were daughters of Vietnam. The earth called us, and we answered." The tunnels of Cu Chi are quiet now. Tourists crawl through them with flashlights, amazed by their size, their complexity. But what they cannot see are the stories buried in the clay, the laughter, the screams, the beating hearts that once echoed in the dark. Every scratch in the walls is a memory carved by hand. Every chamber is a grave of courage. Today at the Cu Chi Memorial, there is a small display, a tattered uniform, a rusted shovel, a faded photograph of young women smiling in the mud. No medals, no names, just a simple plaque. Women of the tunnels, heroes of the earth. They were not born to be warriors. They became warriors because they had no choice. They fought in silence. They lived in darkness. And in the heart of the earth, they found the light of courage. "We lived like ghosts," one woman said. But we fought like fire. Decades have passed since the last bomb fell over Kuchai. The jungle has grown back. The rivers run clear again, and the birds, once driven away by fire, have returned to sing above the old battlefields. But beneath the soil, the echoes remain. Beneath every tree root, every mound of earth, lies the memory of a war fought, not just with guns, but with hands, hearts, and the unbreakable will of women. The Cu-Chi tunnels are now a monument. Tour buses arrive daily. Guides lead visitors through narrow passages, explaining how soldiers once lived below the ground. Most of them speak of strategy, of traps, of tactics, of engineering genius. But few mention the women who made it possible, the mothers who dug in the night, the daughters who carried ammunition, the nurses who stitched wounds by candlelight, the silent figures who gave everything and asked for nothing. In one corner of the Cu-Chi Museum, there is a display, small, almost hidden. A faded photograph of 5 young women, mud on their faces, smiling despite the exhaustion. A plaque beneath it reads, "Underground Fighters 1968. No names, just a year, just a memory." But historians began to ask questions. Who were they? Where did they go? What became of those women after the war? The answers came slowly. Through old letters, through interviews, through the whispers of survivors. They found that some had returned to their villages to rebuild what little remained. Others had joined local cooperatives, helping replant rice and restore irrigation. Some became teachers, raising a new generation born in peace. And some simply vanished, their names fading into the dust of time. Among those rediscovered stories was that of Nguyen Thi Lan, the young digger who died in the collapse of 1973. Her younger sister, Mai, survived the war. For years, she believed Lan's body was lost forever. Then, in 1998, while workers restored part of the tunnels, they found a rusted shovel engraved with 3 letters scratched by hand, L-T-L, Lan Thi Lan. Mai visited the site soon after. She knelt beside the plaque that now bears her sister's name and whispered, "You're home now." Today, school children visit Cu-Chi to learn about history. They crawl through the tunnels, laughing nervously, their flashlights flickering in the dark. Their guides tell them, "This is where our ancestors hid. This is where they fought for our freedom." And in those moments, even if they don't realize it, they walk through the living veins of their nation's past. The women of Cu-Chi left behind more than tunnels. They left behind lessons about endurance, about sacrifice, about the quiet strength that lives in those who are never seen. They showed that war is not only fought with weapons, but with patience, with love, with faith that tomorrow might still come. "We fought for the right to be free," one survivor said. "But more than that, we fought for the right to dream." In 2005, the Vietnamese government recognized the women tunnel fighters of Cu-Chi as heroes of the People's Armed Forces. Ceremonies were held, medals pinned to faded uniforms. But the medals were not the real reward. For most of them, it was the acknowledgement and the simple fact that someone finally remembered. "All my life," said one woman, "I wanted only one thing, for the world to know we were here." Even now, some of them still live near Cu-Chi, in small wooden houses built on the land they once fought to protect. They tend to gardens, raise grandchildren, and sit on their porches when the sun sets, watching the sky burn orange above the jungle. When asked if they would do it again, every one of them said yes. We were born in war, said one veteran, but we wanted peace for those who came after. The tunnels, those dark veins beneath the ground, still stand as a symbol of defiance. Not just of Vietnam's victory, but of human resilience itself. When you crawl through them, you feel the weight of earth above you, the silence pressing in. It's not just history, it's memory. It's the sound of heartbeats that refuse to stop. In the heart of Vietnam, the earth still breathes. And in that breath lies the spirit of the women who once dug through darkness, who turned soil into shelter and fear into fire. Their story is not of glory, but of grace. Not of victory, but of survival. Because real heroism does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers from beneath the ground, "We are still here," it says. Listen and remember.